several students have asked me this question in one way or another. And I think it's a very tough question to answer. Basically, they want to know who should make the decision about what's going on in terms of the coronavirus response. Should governments be responsible? Should technocrats be responsible? Should the medical community be responsible? Who really should be making these decisions? And this kind of question is very, very difficult. It goes to the heart of policymaking and the heart of sort of democracy, or how government works. Essentially, there are some governments around the world that are basically relying only on the medical experts. Someone mentioned Sweden. I haven't looked deeply into it, but they said Sweden is basically following the advice of the medical experts. You have other countries like the United States, which basically puts Trump at the center, and he's making policy decisions based on advice and ideas from other people who also present their ideas in the front. Now, the way I answer in a more objective sort of academic sense is that every country is going to be different, and ultimately the way the policies are formulated is a result of balance and bargaining between different interests. Even in the most strict sort of authoritarian systems, there are going to be varied interests among those elite who are actually making the decisions. So even if you have one person at the head of a government, of a country, they're going to have advisors, and they're going to have people that they need to please in order to maintain that position of power. So it's not like the person can make their decisions in complete isolation from everyone else. So all policies are a result of some kind of bargaining. And then the question just becomes, well, where is the balance? What kind of bargaining do you want? Do you want to balance economic interests a little bit higher than security interests? Do you want security interests higher than economic interests? Health and safety higher than everything? And the other thing is that you have to remember that there are secondary and tertiary consequences for different policy decisions. So the second point is really that you make a policy, you don't always know what the consequences of that policy might be. There are lots of unintended consequences of policies that we make, and that often is best understood by someone who's actually a policy maker rather than an academic or a particular specialist in a field. So, an epidemiologist knows viruses. That's all they know. They don't know how the economy works. They might not know how policies work. They don't know how guns work. So if you make a policy just based on an epidemiological perspective, then you will be able to address that issue, address the viral issue, but you won't be able to deal with any other issues. For example, people who lose their jobs because they can't work because everyone's locked down. What happens to those people? What if they're paying rent? What if they can't afford rent? What if they can't afford food? What kind of other government policies need to be implemented in conjunction with this idea of locking everyone down? And then you got to think of the moral side too. This is the third point, right? What about individual freedoms? What about human rights? All of these other things that go sort of existential beyond the rule of law, beyond the policies of a particular government, beyond even the virus. Do you really want to lock people down? Do you want police on the streets? These are questions that I think everybody needs to answer for themselves, what their preferred preference is. But ultimately, each government is going to have their own process for deciding. And at this point, it's impossible to say which government is correct. I mean, some people keep pointing to Japan and saying, we want more lockdown, we want police in the streets, we want everyone to be prevented from moving. I'm not actually in favor of that. And I wonder, actually, if that's effective. We look at China's policy and people say that they were so successful, they did a great job, but we don't really know, do we? We don't know because we don't have a counterfactual. We don't know what would have happened otherwise if they didn't institute those policies, and we may have seen exactly the same curve. We really don't know. All we have are some models that are actually wrong a lot of times, and these days the modeling has been quite wrong. So we don't really know if any of these particular policies are effective at all at containing the virus. We don't know which countries' policies are more effective at sustaining economic, maintenance. It's not development, but it's just, maintaining some level of economy so that people can live and buy food and things. And we don't know any of this stuff. We won't know for many, many years. So I think at this point, every country is sort of muddling through. They're just doing their best, trying to figure out what works for their people, what works for their current situation with the virus, what works for their economic system so that they don't collapse. And all of these things are sort of competing interests, and it's very complicated, very hard to make a good policy. Actually, there's one famous model of agenda setting, and I think policymaking is sort of simple. One idea is that you throw a bunch of garbage in a garbage can, or throw a bunch of policies in the garbage can, you shake it up, and then something comes out. And that policy is usually stuck with all kinds of things that from other policies, right? Lots of little things stuck on there, and lots of little compromises and pieces of different ideas get stuck onto the policy, and that's the end result. And that's sort of a way in which policies might be created, not necessarily maybe the best way. I mean, there's no way to know. But I think the point is that we don't really know what the best policy is. There's no way to know if policies are effective at this point, and we won't know that for a long time. And policymaking is very complicated. It does actually depend on the balance between different interests and a compromise between a lot of different actors. Perhaps that's not really a satisfying answer. I'm not sure, because basically I didn't answer anything. I just said that it's complicated and we don't really know. But I think that it's important for you to understand as a student or as a scholar or as a thinker, as a critical thinker, that it's best not to just jump on one bandwagon, jump on one policy or jump on one idea, and really think about the consequences of that policy, following it all the way through. I mean, it's possible that a complete lockdown of Japan's society could really shut down the whole economic system. I mean, what would happen if you shut down the stores, right? People can't get food. Well, some people might starve, right? I mean, you need policies, you need, infrastructure in there to help those people get food. And so there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. And if you start to think about the consequences of those policies and where they lead, I think you'll be better able to think critically about the situation and what policy makes sense for you.